Why is 6 afraid of 7? Because 7 ate 9. What did the 0 say to the 8? Nice belt. But why did 7 eat 9? Because you're supposed to eat 3 squared meals a day. Why should you never talk to Pi? Because he'll just go on forever. Did you hear about the mathematician who's afraid of negative numbers? She'll stop at nothing to avoid them. What do you get when you take a bovine and divide its circumference by its diameter? A cow pie. Did you hear about the statistician who drowned crossing a river? It was 3 feet deep on average. Why don't calculus majors resist going out for a drink? Because you should never drink and derive. What do you call a number that can't keep still? A Roman numeral. 3 statisticians go out hunting together. After a while, they spot a solitary rabbit. The first statistician takes aim and overshoots. The second aims and undershoots. The third shouts, quote, "We got him," end quote. Did you hear the one about the statistician? Probably. How do mathematicians scold their children? Quote, "If I've told you n times, I've told you n plus 1 times, ... end quote. Old mathematicians never die. They just lose some of their functions. What happens when you put root beer in a square glass? It just becomes beer. Why do mathematicians like parks? Because of all the natural logs. Infinitely many mathematicians walk into a bar. The first says, quote, "I'll have a beer," end quote. The second says, quote, "I'll have half a beer," end quote. The third says, quote, "I'll have a quarter of a beer," end quote. Before anyone else can speak, the bartender fills up exactly 2 glasses of beer and serves them. Quote, "Come on now," end quote. He says to the group, quote, "You guys have got to learn your limits," end quote. Why should you never mention the number 288? It's too gross. Why can math books be so depressing? Because they're filled with problems. What kind of math do you learn in English class? Adverbs and adjectives. What do you need to grow your trigonometry skills? Square roots. Why does algebra make you a better dancer? Because you can use algorithm. An engineer thinks equations are an approximation of reality. A physicist thinks reality is an approximation of equations. A mathematician doesn't care. Mathematics is the art of giving the same name to different things. Math is like love, a simple idea, but it can get complicated. How do you make 7 an even number? Take the s out. Why don't you do arithmetic in the jungle? Because if you add 4 plus 4, you get 8. Where do math teachers go on vacation? To Times Square. What do you call friends who love math? Algebros. What did the mathematician say when he finished his birthday dinner? Root of -1 divided by root of 64, parentheses, I over 8, end parentheses. Why did the mutually exclusive events break up? They had nothing in common. How is an artificial Christmas tree like the fourth root of -68? Neither has real roots. Why didn't the chicken cross to the other side of the inequality? It couldn't get past the boundary line. Parentheses, write vertically end parentheses, PLAN. Parentheses, P plus L end parentheses, parentheses, A plus N parentheses, PA plus PN plus LA plus LN. Your plan has been foiled. I made a mistake and hired an odd job person to do 8 jobs for me. But at the end of the day, they only did jobs 1, 3, 5, and 7. My significant other is the square root of -100. They are a perfect 10, but purely imaginary. Why didn't the Romans find algebra very challenging? Because they always knew x was 10. Why was the student afraid of the y-intercept? She thought she'd be stung by the bee. Who invented algebra? A clever expert. Why did the relation need a math tutor? It failed the vertical line test. How does a ghost solve a quadratic equation? By completing the scare. Why was the parent function upset with its child? It was stretched to its limit. Are monsters good at math? No, unless you count Dracula. If nothing is better than life, and if a ham sandwich is better than nothing, does that mean that a ham sandwich is worth dying for? A physicist, a biologist, and a mathematician are sitting on a bench across from a house. 2 people go into the house, and then 3 people come out. The physicist says, quote, "The initial measurement was incorrect," end quote. The biologist says, quote, "They must have reproduced," end quote. The mathematician says, quote, "If exactly 1 person enters that house, it will be empty," end quote. 60 out of 50 people have trouble with fractions. So, Descartes goes into a bar for a drink. At closing time, the bartender asks him if he wants a refill. Descartes replies, quote, "I think not," end quote, and disappears. What do you get when you cross an algebra class with the prom? The quadratic formal. Why did the imaginary number turn red? It ran out of eye drops. Why is the rational root theorem so polite? It minds its P's and Q's. Why did the polynomial plant wilt? Its roots were imaginary. How did you know your dentist studied algebra? She said all that candy would produce exponential decay. How did the chicken find the inverse? It reflected the function across y equals eggs. Why did algebra struggle at love? It had too many x's. Why did the doctor send the expression to the psychiatrist? It wasn't rational. How can you predict how many protesters will show up at a rally? By using a radical function. Why did the algebra teacher drum on the algebra book? Because they were studying logarithms. What do you call a snake after it drinks 3 cups of coffee? A hyperboa. What is the smart bird's favorite math? Algebra. What is HO cubed? Ho, ho, ho. How can you tell when a factorial is enthusiastic? It has an exclamation point. What is 7q plus 3q? Answer, 10q. You're welcome. Did you study your algebra lesson at the family reunion? Sure. It was a function with relations. Why did your mother and father do your algebra homework? They really understand parent functions. What is 2n plus 2n? I don't know. It sounds 4n, parentheses 4n, and parentheses to me. Let's find the square root of 1 million. Don't you think that's a bit too radical? Nurse, I have so many patients. Who do I work on first? Simple. Use the order of operations. Your behavior reminds me of the square root of 2. Why? Because it's completely irrational. The artist Picasso must have been really good at algebra. Why do you say that? Because he was a famous cubist, so he probably had to do a lot of factoring. Knock knock. Who's there? Polly. Polly who? Polynomial. Why the 3rd degree?